Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You can start the clapping now, if you'd like to. Thank you. Welcome to the Wheeler Centre in all of its literary and air-conditioned glory. I hope you're enjoying it today. It's a nice break from the heat. My name's Nelly Thomas. I'm going to be your host today. We are, of course, talking to the fabulous Monica Dux. If you could please give her a round of applause. I think I can speak for both of us when I say we are absolutely thrilled to be here. We both, between us, have 4 kids under 6, so we're just happy to be out of the house. So, now I need to ask before we start, do we have any pregnant women here? Okay, I'm just apologising in advance. All right, just hug somebody. That's all I'm saying. Now, we're going to be talking about Monica's new book, Things I Didn't Expect When I Was Expecting, and I will alternately interrogate, grill, tickle.
I will weep.
I thought you were going to say we then. We'll get on to we. Don't worry about that. Throughout the next 40 or 45 minutes, and then we'll have questions at the end. So if I can ask you to please hold your questions until then, we'd appreciate that. Could you also turn off your phones, if you don't mind? Thank you. All right, I'm going to get cracking straight away because we've got a lot to get through. Hello, Monica.
Hi, Nelly. Can I say before we start, Nelly's book's fantastic.
Oh, now...
No,
okay.
It is. I just read it. I know there probably won't be time when we're talking about me, but I've just read Nelly's book and I was really excited. And
thank you very much. This is your event. Excellent.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you so much.
I'll put that out there now.
Thank you. That's very kind. You're not allowed to ask me any questions. Okay. Now, first, I just wanted to start...
Why did it take you so long to mention feminism? No, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Firstly, I just want to start with a question of style. If you don't mind, not your style in particular, although we could get onto that. Monica, for those of you who don't know, is a defector from academia. She's schooled in the ways, and I assume stylings of, post-structuralism and semiotics and the signifier and the signified and all those other things that most people know Foucault about. Hey? Look at that pun. Not just a pretty face. So I wanted to ask you, Monica, a couple of things. Why did you write such a clear and plain-spoken book with accessible language? How did you manage to write such a clear and plain-spoken book with accessible language? And my personal favourite, where do you get your filthy mouth from? Because believe me, it is filthy.
It's funny. I've had... it could have been a lot filthier. And I keep thinking... people have responded, and people have been saying to me a lot about my husband, how does he feel about all of this? I'm thinking, I didn't realise it would be an issue. So, I did leave academia, so did you. I interviewed you years ago.
Did you?
Yeah, very briefly, over the phone, because you had fled from your PhD.
Right.
And I was kind of saying how when you flee from a PhD, you actually are more successful because you've kind of made that leap, but you've always got this thing that you can use as an excuse for a few years as to, you're in between things. Anyway,
And a very large HEC step. No problem.
Well, yeah, but academia did teach me what I didn't want to be, and one of the biggest frustrations I had when I was working at uni was just how little kind of really gets said and how hard it is to say anything, and also how frightened people often are to say things. And I can understand why that often happens in the humanities, but that real sense of gatekeeping and not just saying it and being unafraid to say it really kind of frustrated me so much. And I think a lot of my writing, I have thought, I just want to say it and then get it out there and have a conversation. So, yeah.
So it wasn't so much, was it a deliberate strategy for the audience, or was it that's actually how you speak?
I think that is how I do kind of talk a lot about my privates and that generally in life. But
I'll get onto that.
No, I had a very Catholic upbringing, and I think that does instill in you quite a fascination with poo bum. I love poo jokes. Like I really, when my son, who's 6, does the poo joke thing, I still love them. I love poo.
Happy birthday, fart face, all that stuff.
It's so funny. Like, poo is funny. But I do tend to, and I'm very confessional, and I think, it's fun. There are things in the book that I didn't put in. So,
Really?
I didn't write about my hemorrhoids, for instance. But, I do speak like that. And I have spent a lot of time over the years wanting to be much more voice-driven. Because when I started writing, it was very much voice-driven work, because there are some things at writing I know I'm not very good at, but the things that I know I am good at is just speaking, using my spoken voice. And I kind of got away with that for years. I was writing a lot on feminism and I felt like I was getting really worthy and serious, and that was really troubling me. And I really wanted to write a book that was funny and just kind of put it out there.
I think it's really interesting. I think anyone could read your book, and that is not true of most people with an academic background, I think. So well done.
Oh, thanks, Nelly.
Getting on to
same for your book.
Stop it. The intensely personal nature of the book, which you've already touched on. For those of you who haven't read it, there is quite a lot about birth wounds. There's a lot about farts. And there is 2 anecdotes about shitting yourself in public, and that's not a metaphor. That's literal. An entire chapter dedicated to your enormous, monstrous post-birth vagina. They're her words, not mine. So why did you include such personal stories? What response have you had to them? And do strangers regularly ask to see, as I like to call it, your vagiant?
It has got a lot smaller, but it's still... But I think I said in the book my husband's penis has obviously shrunk in recent years.
That happens to fathers. It does.
It does. You have the. I found pregnancy to be a really visceral, full-on experience, and I felt like I was being lied to all the time, and I felt like there was all this euphemism, and I felt like my actual experience, which was, not just about my body, but also my emotional state, that I was never being able to speak to it, and no one was ever speaking it to me. I was, I just found everyone was trying to wash over everything, and it was making it worse for me because I felt like a lot of my dignity was being taken away a lot of the time, like this poo issue. You do a poo sometimes when you give birth, and no one would take that seriously. And of course, I may not have cared when I got there. But
can I just give you some background for those who haven't read it? Monica was terrified of doing a poo when she gave birth. Absolutely terrified, and felt but that people didn't take that terror seriously.
No, and women are. Like, when I was researching the book, so many women said to me, oh, that's my fear. And when you're constantly told, oh, it's nothing. And same with the body changes. I mean, one thing that really struck me about being pregnant was that my body changed so all completely, particularly with my second pregnancy. Everything changed. And it's not just that you have the baby grow. Like, everything changes. And women experience that very differently. But I think on a really basic understanding of how we relate to the world, when you change so rapidly and so quickly, it really, it's very weird, and it does things to your mind and blah, blah, blah. And I felt that all I was being told, not just by people I was, seeing on a medical sense, but also the broader culture, everyone was telling me it should be seamless and I should feel fantastic and find it wonderful at all times. And that wasn't my experience at all.
And don't worry, which of course makes you worry more.
Well, we live in such a risk-obsessed culture as well. So pregnant women today, more than any other time, are in a state of panic because we are told you can't eat this and you can't do that, and if you have half a glass of wine, you're going to birth a baby with 3 eyes or something.
And we'll get on to the risk, but I just want to ask specifically in relation to disclosure, because I know there's a lot of debates about, for want of a better description, confessional writing. For you, is it, in the book, was it a deliberate, if you like, activist kind of strategy, or again, is that just how you approach pregnancy and life in general? Well, partly. I mean, I am quite explicit, and I always have been. I mean, this is, I guess it is me and how but I think it's the kind of stuff that women actually do want to talk about. Not all women, but, a lot of women actually do. And I've always found this in life, even with things like relationships. And when you actually say to someone, well, this is what's really going on, it's so refreshing. Yeah, it's a real relief, because we're experiencing this. And so for me, and, in terms of disclosure, I mean, I'm not ashamed that I had I had this, my monstrous vagina was funny to me. Vagiant. My vagiant was, it was upsetting, but it was also like, oh my God. And I have 2 anecdotes in the book about how I shat myself publicly before I had kids in my 20s. And the first time... She really does.
Yeah, but the first time that happened, I was 23, and I thought, oh, that's, an accident. The second time it happened, I thought, oh, it's a habit. That's kind of...
Actually, my favourite part of the book was when she said, shitting yourself, no, it really is as bad as it sounds.
Yeah, it's terrible. But when that happened, I remember a few days after, particularly the second time, first time, I woke up the next morning and I thought, I've just got to tell everyone, it's really funny shitting yourself in public. Like, it's not funny at the time, but those things are funny. And it's that sense of, as human beings that we're so contained.
It's absolutely relief. And I think there are several moments in the book where Oprah has what she calls, the aha moments. I had those moments in the book where I went, thank fuck.
Well, and that's what pregnancy...
That's me too.
Yeah, and when you're pregnant, you are falling apart in different ways. And, it's not all monstrous. It's just intense. And I think all that sense of things falling out of you, and even after you have the baby and you've got all this milk squirting out of your boobs, and it's like, oh, my God. And
the euphemisms of the health discourse around pregnancy seem to just follow straight on from the euphemisms in sex ed.
Yeah.
You go from woohoo to, oh, what happened?
Yeah, it is.
So I think being explicit is actually why the book works.
And one thing that's always got me is when they describe labour pains as discomfort.
Oh.
It's like, yeah, right.
Mild pushing.
Yeah, pushing.
Yeah, mild pushing. I don't want to scare the pregnant women too much, but we'll get there. I do want to ask you specifically about the title, because you, and I assume many of you in the audience are, pinko, queero, commie, feminista types. A couple of feminists with a sense of humour. Andrew Bolt obviously just vomited. But you're well-read, you're overeducated, you're a bit of a worrywart. So is the title literally true, or is it a catchy pun? For example, when it came to the subjugation of self that you talk about, or the loss of bodily integrity, or the inequality of motherhood, were those things that you really didn't expect? Yeah. And if so, which shocked you most?
That was definitely, I didn't expect any of it.
None of those?
No, with my first child, it was there was a moment in the shower, and my first book, which was I co-authored about feminism, actually came from that moment, I think, where I was showering and just thinking, this... I am, and I was pregnant. And I was like, oh, you're so beautiful, Molly. No, I had this moment of realising how much my womb, all this feminism I'd done all these years throughout my 20s and all that I believed in and all of that completely changed my perspective when I realised that, I am vulnerable. And that sense of vulnerability, like that I was at the mercy of so many people, and that my body was suddenly this thing. I couldn't deny the fact that I was suddenly a woman, and I'd spent a lot of time thinking, I'm equal, and it's just about changing structures.
But for example, I assume in much of the feminist reading that you've done, you would have read significant amounts about how the loss of self is so profound for women. In fact, that's why some feminists counsel against having children altogether. Had those things impacted on your experience, or you kind of went, not really?
I'd ignored a lot of that, and I think you do before you procreate, for good reasons. But I think most of the feminism I kind of was sympathetic to didn't talk about motherhood. And, and there's a really big divide from 70s feminists and onwards about maternal feminism and, the other sort. And there's a lot of tensions in that. Do we see our power in our wombs and all of that crap? And I had, before I had kids, I just thought...
Welcome 70s feminists.
I kind of resented mothers and children and everything like you do in your 20s before, and I think for me it changed perspective in a lot of ways about what happens. But I didn't expect I thought that I would look like Mia Farrow in Rosemary's Baby. I did, and I got a haircut that made me. And it was so bad. So bad.
I love that. Again, the description in the book. Basically, Monica says, I thought I had the high cheekbones for it, and realised when I left the hairdressers that I did not.
No,
you have them now.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I've got implants. No, I had a vision that it'd be a really sweet time, and then I'd have the baby,
and you'd write a book.
I'd write a book, and I'd be a family, and you get all that kind of, because I think motherhood today and pregnancy, it's held up as this wonderful achievement in a lot of ways, which is a crock, because there are some good things about it, but it is seen as this. I do love my children.
But isn't it actually...
You have to say that too.
Yes, you do have to say that. I assume you all know she loves her children. Yeah. But I find that quite interesting, actually, that you can spend, say, in your case and my case, and I'm sure many of the cases of you, your education, your formative years, if you like, critiquing the notion of the family. And it's incredibly shocking
when you become one.
When you become pregnant, how quickly that stuff comes back, as though you've never read a book.
I didn't even think about, and this is maybe, I don't think I'm unique in this, but even things like, I remember a few weeks before I gave birth to my first, going for a walk with my husband, who's a writer as well, and suddenly saying, oh, how are we going to, like, you know, deal with the childcare? Like, are we going to, how do we divide that up? Like, these kind of things about how you're, I don't think you do really understand what's going to happen until it happens, and everyone works it out in different ways. But I don't think that I think partly it is that we don't value care work today in a lot of ways, and so we really kind of gloss over all the stuff that happens. Yeah,
I think also that's probably why, you know, we've all done it, and we've all had friends who've done it, where you have women with new babies, especially if they're home with them, who regale you with poo stories, and he ate avocado for the first time today, and look at that fingernail and all that shit, you know, your eyes glaze over. Yeah. But I think it's because, A, that work's not valued, but also something so profound is happening to your sense of identity, and no one notices.
Well, that's the other one, like the mother, like, and I've got a chapter in the book on mothers groups, and I actually never went to my mother's group because they didn't invite me. And and I thought it was me, like, you know, because they send the maternal health nurse around.
You might be lucky. We'll get on to that.
Well, that's, but what I really struggled with after I had my first child was suddenly realising I'd become this stereotype, and that, you know, I adored my son, and everything was changing, but on top of that you're suddenly looked at completely differently. Everyone, you're suddenly this mother, and then you find yourself being drawn to Country Road, and you know you do, and all these things start, and you know, and but you being a mother too, the way you get talked to, it's like when I was in my late teens, I rode motorbikes, and I loved motorbikes, and I was really it was really hard being a woman on a motorbike, and I used to go with my dad, who, you know, doesn't look like he would ride motorbikes anymore, because he used to ride motorbikes many years before, would go to the bike shops, and they would never talk to me, and I was the person who was there about my bike. It was so clearly, I had a helmet in my hand, and no one ever made eye contact with me. It was always about him, and it was infuriating. And I found, like, when I was a mother, there were instances where they would never make eye contact with my husband. It was when it came to the kid, it was always about me. It was like the struggle to actually just not suddenly be this thing that they saw. I found really overwhelming.
Well, I think there's the internal struggle, which I sense in your book, and I know most of us feel too, when you're sitting there at one point with a group of parents, usually women, usually mothers, and everyone's talking about the fucking calorie count of avocado, and you want to kill yourself.
Yeah, and you know, conversations.
Like, is this what my life has come to?
You do, and you go. The thing that struck me too, you go to the park, and you've got a newborn, and I really wanted people to ask me what I did and what I had, but you can't ask that sometimes because you also realise that. Yeah, and there's women who, you know, maybe, and you just don't. And so no one asks what you do. No one talks about what you're really feeling. So often it is just, you know, he's eating avocado.
Let me ask you about truth. Avocado is a topic that comes up frequently in mothers' groups, I find.
Apparently it's very similar to breast milk in composition.
Oh, really?
I was told. No, that's why the kids love avocado.
And breast milk. A question about truth. So a recurring theme in the book is truth, perhaps ambivalence, being a truth of yours versus fiction, or what you call the happy gestator, which I like to think of just skipping down the road to Country Road now you've said that. You point out that while mothers and healthcare professionals don't necessarily lie outright about their experiences, like maybe they really did have contractions that felt like mild pushing, but you say that you essentially felt deceived at various points, as I think a lot of women do. So maternal child health nurses seem to be one of the biggest culprits, and like you, I sort of resented being surveilled by them under the guise of help. So my question is this: if health professionals told us the truth, would we actually believe them? If, for example, your maternal child health nurse said, you know what, there's a lot of different theories about healthy fetuses and healthy babies, we're not quite sure, so do what you think's best, would you actually accept that? Yeah,
because, I mean, look, partly, say with it...
Now and before.
Well, the issue of risk is... you know, you end up feeling so guilty, and you end up feeling like, oh, I'm doing everything wrong. And to have someone give you that reprieve, I think is really important, because I think we are lied to a lot. Like, we are lied to a lot. You get told stuff that isn't evidence-based all the time when you're pregnant. And there's an example that, and it really grates me, in that, say with drinking alcohol, there are no studies, no conclusive studies that demonstrate any adverse impact on the fetus from small to moderate, I think it's even to moderate consumption of alcohol. Now, the reason the NHMRC, now they've got this blanket ban on drinking now, and I didn't really drink through my pregnancies, and it was good. It cured my alcoholism, but that's a side issue. No, but so often, a lot of the rhetoric is sold to women because this sense that we don't trust them. If we tell them that one glass of wine at a Christmas
10.
function, they're going to have 10. Yeah. We don't believe they're children.
Can I tell you something that will roll you up even more? So I had my second baby 6 months ago and participated in the very study that you're talking about. They are actually doing a study now to see if moderate amounts of alcohol do affect fetal development.
So you binge drank for the study.
But the midwife who asked me if I'd do the study and sat down and had clearly been trained in how to do it said, we are doing this study so we can tell women for sure not to drink when they're pregnant.
That's exactly right. And it's really infantilising. And so the issue with maternal health nurses, I think there's another thing going on there in that we're dealing with a big structure that is catering to all the population, and it kind of loses everything in the meantime. For instance, the depression test they give you, and that really bothered me. At 3 months' time, when you go to a maternal health nurse in Victoria, they check if you're depressed, and that's fine.
They don't tell you that's what they're doing, though.
No, they don't tell you. You go in. This one's about you. That's what, because I would turn up with my husband because I was really determined that we were sharing everything, and then they would look at him like, "What are you doing? This one's about you." And then, so when I had my second child, I thought, I'm not doing that test because I'm not, I know I'm not depressed. I've had a child, I'm not your market. And the interaction I had with maternity, I was there for like an hour where she kept saying, do you think sometimes, do you ever feel like, I don't know, cutting yourself? You can, No, it was that real...
And what kind of nappies do you use?
Do you ever kind of weep? Because when I said I'm not going to do the test, I'm fine. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. And I think, look, the maternal health structure is very interesting because it's there for a good reason, but it's there for a bad reason as well. And the history of it is a lot more complex than simply these angels came to save us. And some women had really good experiences, like women I spoke to in the book had really good experiences with theirs, and I accept that. But I think there are a lot of women who did feel... There's some terrible stories.
It's also, I think, one of the things you point out is the issue of disclosure. Like if, for example, say with the depression test... second time around, you get a lot more ballsy. I literally just said to the woman, are you asking me if I'm depressed? Yeah. Just tell me what we're doing. I don't appreciate the deception. And the same with the surveillance. You might even accept state surveillance to see that babies are being cared for and mothers are okay, but don't pretend it's not that.
Yeah, and also targets.
It's
that sense of who you're targeting and how you're targeting it. Like I think it is this blanket kind of scattergun approach often in so much of the stuff. But I do think we get lied to. And I don't think the people who are often lying are mean, evil people. I think sometimes they're very well-meaning and they're part of a system. But it just makes everything so much harder. And I mean, the risk thing, going back to that, I think that's a really big one because you are under so much pressure when you're pregnant today to eat certain foods and not, not go up, like how many steps should you climb before you rest?
I'll ask you about that in a second. Can I ask you before we get onto that, about control? Because I think, again, one of the issues that I felt so relieved to hear you discuss was the issue of control in the book. And I think it's like we have this sense that we want things to go exactly as planned. So if we do enough planning and we do enough yoga and we have a birth plan with the right font, that everything will go exactly as we want it to. And it reminded me, reading it in a roundabout way, of my grandma, who actually said to me of my Uncle Kenny. This is when my oldest daughter wasn't sleeping through. And she said, oh, she's like Uncle Kenny. He just wasn't a sleeper, little bastard. Yeah. And I remember thinking, what do you mean? He wasn't a sleeper. Like, no... sleep school, no theories about what I should have done, no guilt about she did the wrong thing. He just wasn't a sleeper. Yeah. So I guess my question is the sense of control both in pregnancy but also child rearing false? If it is, does that add to our guilt? And was Uncle Kenny born an insomniac?
Yeah. Uncle Kenny, he should have... No, Uncle Kenny was a bad man.
That idea that we've got this control, like, if you do this, then they will turn out this way. I'm sure you know people who've gone to sleep school, for example, the result being that all they feel like is that they just failed.
Oh, and sometimes, sometimes those things do work, and some, like people negotiate those things in different ways, but I think it is all about control today. I think in pregnancy we assume that if we do all the right things, we can control everything, our bodies, our birthing, our outcomes, all of that. And I mean, there's a thing, I have a chapter on miscarriage in the book because I had a miscarriage between my 2 kids. And I think that the most obvious example of that is this sense that when you are pregnant, everyone tells you to avoid everything, particularly in the first trimester, because you could miscarry, everything. Like you just kind of...
Don't look at cheese.
You don't look at the moon, you might have a miscarriage. Yeah. And then when you have the miscarriage and they kind of give you the little counselling thing when they tell you it's gone, and then they say, and when that happened, but at the same time they say it had nothing to do with you. Yeah. It had nothing to do with you. You couldn't control it. And you get these 2 extremes. And I think the latter's correct. And I did, some research into this to confirm it.
Although, as you point out in the book, and I've also had miscarriages, and this really struck home with me, they say it had nothing to do with you when their own literature that it can literally be sitting next to you tells you that what it had to do with. Yeah. You were too fat, or you ate the wrong thing, or you smoked, or whatever it was.
Yeah, you're constantly told that you could control this. Yeah. And then you get it had nothing to do with you. Draw. Yeah, and what's the... And it is, more than any other time, I think we just believe... there's a lot of reasons for this. We have so much better medical care today. So we do, in some ways, control outcomes more than we did in the past. Women don't die when they birth as much, but they can still die. We have medical imaging, and I think that's partly what fuels a lot of this is this ultrasound, which, I think ultrasound's great, but when you get an ultrasound, particularly the first one, it's funny, and particularly on a first pregnancy, you think, oh, there's a baby, and it's swimming, and it's waving, and it's real, and you can watch it, but you're not... it's a very mediated image.
You can get a DVD of it.
You can get a DVD.
I don't get that. Who's going to sit down with a DVD? Did you? Do you sit down with a DVD?
Oh, it looks like Uncle Jim. And I didn't with the second.
But now, do you sit down and watch it?
No. It's gone. It's gone. It's just this. They all look the same. Yeah. But they do.
I can have yours and just,
oh, Mum, it wasn't. No, but that kind of sense that we can see this, so we know what's going on, and we can test for everything. And ultimately, I do think you're still, and I kept coming back to this when I was researching the book, is ultimately having a baby is a big deal. It takes a lot of work. It will always take a lot of work, no matter how much we, know more, and even no matter how much, our society feeds us better and we live better. It's still a huge undertaking.
Well, and the sense of risk, which we'll get onto now, is greater, isn't it? So you actually say, I'm going to quote you from the book, you say, the chances of birthing a healthy baby have never been better, yet perceived threat levels have never been higher. And these threats now loom even before conception. So obviously doing the wrong thing, and there are various versions of that, are frowned upon by maternal child health nurses and mother-in-laws and, people down the street, whoever cares to comment, in full recognition of the fact that things like eating junk food and smoking and drinking too much and whatever are harmful. Do you think we should be more honest and open about our own failings, for want of a better word, while we're pregnant? And also, how can health professionals talk to us about the real risk without sounding sanctimonious and judgmental and a bit like douchebags?
Yeah, it's a hard one. And once again, I think it is that this is a huge juggernaut that we're dealing with in terms of, because it's not just pregnancy. We live in a very risk-averse society today, and not just for women and children. It's everywhere. And then, you have issues with how it plays out in the media. They get a press release saying 1 cup of coffee a day, like The Guardian reported this the other week. 1 cup of coffee a day could lower birth weights or something. And you can just imagine being pregnant, putting that coffee down.
Like, they do hedge their bets,
don't they? Those studies are so flawed. Yeah. Like, if you really look... Okay, stress is a really interesting example. There's this huge thing today about getting stressed in pregnant is really bad. And it's not that they say it's just not really good. They end up saying your child could end up with autism or asthma, obesity, diabetes. Like, they'll
never play the piano.
They'll never play. But, it's like they'll never even walk. Yeah. It's like there's this huge... They get out the big guns, and they do this with breastfeeding as well.
And in fact, in all seriousness, though, I found anyway, and I've heard other women say this, all of the warnings that you get about the things you should and shouldn't be doing are incredibly stressful in case you get it wrong.
Well, and the actual studies that they based this original finding on was on women in war-torn countries. And this is where they get their research from generally. Because, you know, once again, you can't experiment on a pregnant woman. So you can't kind of give her a cow prod.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Good on it. There's one study too, I think it's in the early 40s, I think it was in the Netherlands, where there was a huge famine because of the war, and they looked at all the pregnant women's children 40 years later. So women who'd been pregnant at the time, and you know, there was a long famine, and it was harrowing, and these women were under so much emotional stress and also physical stress. And then they found a link, I think it was in the 70s, to schizophrenia. And so you have this situation where women, and they did, I think in Bosnia they did a similar study in the Balkans War. You have these situations where women are in extreme stress. Of course it's going to have an impact on the fetus. That's a kind of duh.
Someone didn't cut them off at the ATM. Like they had a genuinely stressful life.
And so
for the
what we
whole
do today, though, is so much of, you know, don't get stressed, it's really bad. And it's just stupid. And particularly also with the breastfeeding stuff.
It's just stupid.
It is stupid. Like, none of this stuff is very scientific, but we love it. We love it. I think it's really good. It's like gossip. You kind of go, ooh. And you want to control your pregnancy, so you think, if I just kind of hop, skip and jump in that way.
Well, I think you're very susceptible, even a normally quite rational person. Is very susceptible with pregnancy hormones, and also when you've got an infant and you're very tired, to irrationality. Basically, so if someone tells you need to be alarmed, it's very easy to get alarmed.
And it's so easy. I always thought when I was pregnant, it felt like I was living an eating disorder of sorts because of the way I was meant to eat. And I did go a bit crazy with it. But, you know, like, you can't. We went overseas.
Again, the frankness of that, I appreciated that. Again, Monica pretty much mainlined chips and soft drink and ice cream and all sorts of things. I think there'd be plenty of women who would be scared to confess, and confess is the right word, to doing, I mean, look what happened with Chrissy Swan recently, to doing anything that had been advised against, and yet all of us do it. And also,
the bigger frame, once again, is we live in a first world country. We are so privileged. It's like we forget, you know, part of the reason this has come about is because of how lucky we are, but we really forget, and it's insulting. I think it is insulting that there are situations in the world, and there are, you know, in Australia too, poverty, for instance, like is domestic violence. You know,
right, I'm going to stop you because that's my next question, leading very nicely onto the thing that I loved the most about the book, without question, was that you inserted the politics back into what has become an apolitical discussion. I want to just give a lengthy quote. I hope you allow me to do that, from the chapter entitled Puke. What's infuriating about all this manufactured alarm is the burden of personal responsibility it places on pregnant women to take unnecessary steps to protect their vulnerable offspring. The emphasis ought to be on social issues like poverty or domestic violence, which really do have a profoundly negative impact on the health of unborn babies. But these are both problems that require collective action, and so are easier to ignore and dismiss as intractable, whereas emphasising individual responsibility for fetal health lets the rest of society off the hook. Love it. Where has the politics gone? Where's the evidence gone? And how can we reinsert this kind of political discussion, this sort of challenge this kind of individualising of what is a community experience? How can we do that?
I think we
Monica.
should. Yeah, well, I think we should.
If you could answer that now in less than a minute, that would be great.
And then everyone will start weeping and we'll leave,
but
and the world will be a better place.
How it's such a political arena in some way, but much like vaginas and bums and farts and poo, it's not discussed. The politics is not discussed.
No, because it's harder. I think that it's harder, and it is a political thing, and it's kind of it is. Look, I think an individual solution, I suppose, is actually asking questions, and I mean, and you know, doing research on things, like, which isn't very hard to try and find out, well, what is the actual risk. But I think we need more of a collective awareness of things like domestic violence is a really big one, because I mean the fact that, you know, you're most at risk of domestic violence when you're pregnant is really, really shocking. It's a terrible thing. But we don't, I mean, so few people actually really are aware of that. And I guess it goes back to so many issues about women and that. And I think It's like I think there's a lot of nastiness in that individual kind of way that it plays out. But yeah, I guess it's just speaking up about it, and it is a hard one to challenge and I do think a lot of what's going on in pregnancy is happening in other ways outside of pregnancy. You know, it's a broader issue. Not just about risk, but just about even feminist issues, the ones that are sexy and the ones that are not sexy, and the ones that are not sexy, such as poverty. I mean, on a different note, you know, kind of single parents allowance that was horribly cut at the beginning of this year and has put all these mostly mothers into poverty with children, and that hardly gets any news or traction.
It's a lot easier to sort of talk about single mothers giving their kids, you know, Coca-Cola and McDonald's.
Oh, absolutely.
Rather than talking about, you know, the fact that domestic violence is the biggest killer of women under 45 in Victoria.
Yeah. So I don't think it's just a pregnancy thing in terms of the politics of that. Yeah. But I found it really hard.
But just let me stop you for 1 second. In terms of if the stated aim is the health of the child, then we're focusing on the wrong things.
Yeah, I guess that is, we're not actually going back to... I mean, I think we over celebrate that health of that child. God love them. But, you know, it's like a lot of the stuff recently that was happening in Queensland where the police commissioner came out saying that, you know, women, you should be able to lock up pregnant women if they're kind of damaging their fetus in some way. And I think you do go into that funny politics about who is more important. And there was a huge shift in the 20th century, in the late 20th century, massive shift between seeing the mother as pregnant and the child as part of her to seeing them as very separate creatures, and they're in conflict. And that's how we see most pregnant women today are seen as potentially in conflict with their fetus. And that goes back to the alcohol thing. Like she is potentially going to harm her fetus if we say to her that half a glass of champagne will probably do absolutely nothing, and don't worry about it, you know, don't sweat the small stuff.
No, worry about it.
Yeah, well, that's so I think it is this sense that we are, and it is, I mean, on a bigger feminist level, I think it is about ownership of our bodies. And, you know, there are a lot of things that happen in the 20th century to shift the focus. In America, there's some really, really awful stories that you read about and hear about in terms of what happens when a woman's right over her body as a pregnant woman, and not just in terms of abortion, but in terms of, you know, locking women up if they, you know, drinking, a woman who was drunk and then was charged with fetal homicide, and just, you know, and usually poor women. Like, these aren't us. These are like poor women who... Anyway, so...
I wanted to ask you about another issue that you raised, which, again, I found very interesting, the duty of happiness. And in a roundabout way, it actually reminded me of an auntie of mine who once asked me about sexual liberation. Like, clearly she missed it. She asked me what it was.
What did it feel like?
And I tried to explain to her that, you know, women being able to enjoy their sexuality and sex being positive and blah, blah. And I'll never forget, she actually said to me, great, now I have to pretend to enjoy that too. And, which I sort of find quite charming. But it reminded me when you were discussing this duty of happiness for pregnant women and also for mothers. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that and what's wrong with it?
Well, that was, you know, like I found like everyone wanted me to be happy when I was pregnant and to glow, and I just didn't. I looked terrible, and even saying to people I look disgusting, and they would say,
gorgeous.
Yeah, and then after I had the babies, I had one friend who said to me I look like something from Dr. Seuss, like one of those characters. But I distinctly remember her saying to me when I was pregnant, you look fantastic.
Can I ask you, when you did public, obviously we both do public performances, when you, or whatever we want to call it, when you did public appearances, did you say that you felt like crap?
Yeah, I think I did. I couldn't really hide it. I looked like crap. It was hard to... You know, I was pretty upfront that I felt like crap, and I felt like saying that was really...
So you didn't feel that duty to be the sort of happy...
I would have liked to have been, but I felt, particularly with my second pregnancy, I felt sick the whole way through, and I just felt terrible, and I felt tired. You know, it's just hard. And particularly with both of them, I was really morning sick. And I was really sick, and everyone congratulated me. Like, that was the thing. They did, and they do this. They do this.
It's a healthy baby.
Yeah, how exciting, you know. And I kind of, I was so sick, and it's so debilitating. And that kind of, but I mean, that once again, it's what we do in society. I think we are meant to be happy. And I think part of why I wanted to write the book wasn't to say it's bad or it's good. It's like, it just is. It is. This is what it is, and that the fact that there's all this bullshit about it is, you know, and that we're meant to smile and we're meant to have these emotions and
stop telling me to drink ginger tea.
Yeah, ginger tea.
It doesn't work.
And also, I ordered those. You can order lollipops with my second pregnancy. I was so sick, and I was online, and there's these lollipops that if you suck on them, you'll feel fine. It's like
you end up with type 2 diabetes. Excellent. Now, just going back to the baby versus the mother, which again, I found this fascinating that you pointed out that in obstetrics and childcare as well, the position or the focus being baby or mother is actually historically specific. So at the moment, we're very much in a baby-centric kind of focus. And just indulge me for one sec, I'll tell you a very short anecdote about my kid. So my 5-year-old, she actually said to me, there was a thing on Can of Worms, I don't know if you saw that, are dads more important than mums or some kind of nonsense. And she said to me, Mum, are babies more important than mothers? And I said to her, what do you think?
I won't feed you for a week.
And she said, without the mother, there is no baby.
Oh
no.
Oh.
Look at her. Look at her go. So my question's twofold. In contemporary gyno and child rearing and opinion pages, I think arguably the mother's been lost altogether. All right. So there's an assumption that any perceived gain, as you point out, to the fetus or baby, no matter how small, should be endured by the mother no matter what the cost. If that's true, how is this possible after 40 years of feminism, modern feminism, and in an industry that's dominated by women?
Yeah, look, I think we've gone backwards partly because women in so many other ways have gone backwards in terms of our physical, and I think a lot of it is about our physical state, you know, that arguably today there's much more pressure on women to look a certain way and to achieve a certain kind of performance, and you know, even the whole kind of Botox and the way cosmetic surgery and all of those things I think has really made us much more body focused. And so it's kind of I think it's made it harder for women. And look, feminism is an interesting beast because we have come very far, but in a lot of ways we haven't, and we kind of don't want to acknowledge a lot of that. So.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about the place of mothers in society because, again, fascinating discussion in that. Now, you talked about Rosie in Christos Chalkas' novel The Slap. I assume most of you have read The Slap. If you haven't read The Slap, Rosie is the kind of, for want of a better description, like a sort of hippie, sexless. Melissa George played her in the TV show. She breastfed until 5 or whatever it was.
Actually, in the book, I think he was only 3, but in the TV show, because my husband actually
4 or 5. Okay.
wrote for the TV show. So
right. But as you point out, her character is even more hated. Is particularly in the reviews and so on than the wife beater.
Yeah, she's despised.
So you point out, I think your take on it is
my
that
son comes up and I start feeding, but he's 10. If you have
15.
a problem with that,
well
15.
done, yeah.
Actually, my husband, we just believe in him.
He's very bright. But I think your take on it is that it's about kind of revulsion of breastfeeding. But I actually wonder whether it's actually about the fact that Rosie sort of embodies the contradiction of modern motherhood that you speak of elsewhere. And again, I'll just quote briefly. You say, perhaps it's not just the placenta that creates this kind of confusion for us, but pregnancy, childbirth and even motherhood itself. We're collectively frozen, stuck between extremes of reverence and repugnance, struggling how to respond to them. Rosie, I think, is completely selfless, which is expected of mothers, but we kind of hate her for it.
Oh, yeah, and we see that with, like, that whole helicopter parenting debate, which is really flawed and a really uncomfortable thing, I find, because it's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you are the selfless mother, which you're told you should be, then you've lost yourself and you've got no personality left. And if you're not the selfless mother, then you're evil and you're a child abuser. And I think Rosie in The Slap was I found it was a really nasty portrayal, and I think it's that breastfeeding thing. I think we're disgusted. I mean, besides the selflessness, I think we're disgusted by women's bodies and women's autonomy with their bodies, and and it really does feed into the breastfeeding. I mean, I make a joke about breastfeeding a 10-year-old, but it's so fucking, what if I did? I mean, not that I would, because they don't work anymore, but I do think there was there was a really interesting case in the US where a woman who I wrote about in the book, a woman was breastfeeding a 2-year-old. She was a born-again Christian. She was a single mum, and she was getting aroused by it. And some women do get aroused by breastfeeding, and it is very pleasurable when it works. And I really enjoyed breastfeeding at certain times. It's it's like having a cigarette where you just kind of sit there. And
it's so not like having a cigarette.
Yeah,
and I can say that from experience.
Well, you could do both. No, but I didn't...
just rest your ashtray.
I never got aroused by breastfeeding, but I could see how, you've got this... And that some women experience this, but no one talks about it because you can't talk about it. Because the idea, like, what do you do with that? She was actually put in prison. She rang a counselling line, and this poor woman, she was very young, and she said, my 2-year-old, I'm still breastfeeding her, and I'm getting, like, sexual feelings. She wasn't doing anything.
She's accused of being a pedophile.
She was accused of being a pedophile. She was locked up, and she lost her daughter for a year. Like, she had her daughter taken away from her. And in the end, she kind of got her daughter back. But I know that's a very extreme story, but I think that we're very kind of confused when it comes to... And I think it does come down to that selfless mother versus, extreme abuser. I mean, there's nothing kind of in between.
No middle ground. I'm conscious we're going to go to questions, but I'm desperate to ask you one more, which is about the body, which we've spoken of at length, and you talk about in the book. One of the things that I found really interesting was that you talk about, I'm paraphrasing, but basically that when you become pregnant, it is such a clanging reminder that you are in a body and that body is female. For those of us who've been taught to theorise everything, that's really challenging. So I guess my question for you is, have you, after that experience, become, if you like, come out of the closet as an essentialist?
Yeah.
Are you running with wolves or are you running with Judith Butler?
Yeah, no. Actually, I heard Judith Butler mentioned the other day. I was trying to explain to my husband about it. People know Judith Butler?
Everything's a construction. Gender's a construction.
Yeah.
I'm more with her, I must say.
Yeah,
I sound like I'm mocking her, but...
No, Judith Butler's so easily mocked just because she's such a bad writer, but her idea... No, she is.
That's the last time you'll hear that at the Wheeler Centre, I guarantee.
No, but her ideas are fantastic. I've kind of, it took me kind of weeks to read a few pages of her.
But it is actually a shock, is it not, when you have been taught and believe that gender is a construction and the differences between men and women are exaggerated, and all of a sudden you're in such a very specifically female experience and taken into your body almost against your will, certainly in childbirth. Yeah. How did you negotiate that? I mean, I always wanted to be a boy when I was growing up. Like, I really wanted to be a boy because I thought life was better for boys. And sometimes I think, life is better for boys. I think having babies is hard work and it's great, but I feel very much more in my body. But no, I'm not running with any wolves. I think you age rapidly when you have children. I felt like it, and you do. There's some kind of... But you do talk in the book about how I think because we're so desperate not to reinforce these kind of stereotypes about men and women, it can lead to a bit of a denial as well that it is a very female experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and also this is, for me, I feel this very strongly, that I think, getting men involved in care work and actually having them share the care of children is something that's very important, and we need to really have a revolution about, and I feel very strongly about that. I think the fact that I carry the child doesn't mean I should therefore be the full-time carer, and it doesn't mean I think that my emotions for that child are any different than my partner's. Like, I think my partner actually has the same. It's just that I had to shit the watermelon, and that does, that has I think it's more of an impact on me.
And you point this out though, it does mean that you probably will be, if not the full-time carer, do most of the care. Well, that's we're still there.
We're living in a world where it is women who end up doing most of the care, and I think I do think that's just a thing we can change. I think in terms of the biological side and the essentialism, it was much more of and my book doesn't talk much about my children. It's really just about me. I was kind of fascinated by the way that I changed, and emotionally, I think the changes I had about, being a mother were things that my husband had. The stuff about, becoming a mother and the stereotypes and that were something that I don't think has to be like that. Yeah. But my stomach has to be the way it is. But it's really quite fascinating what's happened to my stomach. But anyway.
Feel free to ask questions about that. I would love to ask you about 50 more questions, but I'm conscious that I want to give you your say. So does anyone in the audience, would you like to ask Monica anything? Question or comment? No one's going to ask about your vagina.
That's really nice.
I thought you'd let us know how, has it bounced back, as they say.
I'm doing my pelvic floor exercise. Are you doing yours?
Oh, as soon as someone says pelvic floor, I start doing them.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Any other time? Never. Every woman in this audience is now doing their pelvic floor.
You do, don't you? You had a baby.
But if no one mentions it...
No, and I feel like everyone can see I'm doing them.
They can't see. You're not, going up to... Well, if you're not going to ask a question, I'm going to ask you another one. Okay, there you go. It's in the middle there. Yes, thank you.
I'm a journalist. I'm genetically programmed to ask questions.
I can't
help it. I was just wondering, Monica, I've not read your book, but I was wondering if you sort of feel as though it seems to be coming at the end of another couple of other books, like Joan Wolfe's book, Jessica Valenti's book, those sorts of things. If you feel as though there is actually a bit of a revolution going on, albeit slightly underground, and maybe not mainstream, about the way that we view mothering?
I think there was in the 90s Susan Mousehart's book, The Mask of Motherhood, is just stellar, wonderful, beautiful book. And I think she was one of the kind of pioneers of critiquing motherhood. I mean, there was a big critique in the 70s, of course, and the 80s about the institution. But I think Susan Mousehart really... there were other writers at the time started talking a bit more about the experience, and there has been a bit of a revival in talking about it. I still think that it's their little voices. I don't think we're very. I think we will always keep talking about motherhood, and I think every generation will reflect on their experience. I mean, I know that my book is very much about my generation and my world. So, yeah, I think...
Can I add something to that? I think as well, because it was such a big discussion in the 90s and obviously in the 70s as well and prior to that, but I think a lot of women who are having children now, when we face the seemingly intractable inequality that comes with motherhood, it's kind of an embarrassing personal secret.
Yeah.
It's like a personal failure to say, oh, actually, I did end up doing most of the housework. Oh, I did. So I wonder if we just don't really talk about it truthfully. The stuff you talk about in terms of not out and out lying, but just kind of holding the truth back. Yeah. Because it feels shameful.
And I think it's exactly right in terms of the generation thing. I think we are like children of the feminist revolution, and we are meant to have all these things, and being pregnant is one way to really highlight how unequal we still are.
And God forbid you're your mother.
Yeah, it's kind of, I know, and then you realise you become your mother and it's okay, and then you ring and apologise to her for the fact that you were so awful. And then she says things like, you weren't that bad, and you think, Anyway, but when I wrote the book, for me, reading about motherhood can get really boring. I mean, like for everyone, it can get really boring. And I wanted to write something funny. Like I started by writing a chapter on poo to see what I could come up with. And I thought I'll write about poo, and that's my forte. And it worked. But the more I kind of wrote, the more questions I had. And I realised I didn't want to write a book that was just, boom tish motherhood, because and then I didn't want to write a book that was like the answer to motherhood today.
Oh, it's very much both.
Yeah, I wanted, and that's why I guess I talked about my own experience, because I felt a bit of pressure. It was funny because I'd written a book on feminism, that I had people contact me over the years that I was writing it saying, I hear you're writing about motherhood and feminism. And I think I just can't write. I don't want to write the big answer.
What were you most frightened of writing in terms of potential controversy? Did it come true? No,
there's a lot in the book that and it hasn't come true yet, but there's a lot in the book that I did think,
Did you think like midwives at 50 paces? Or
I thought my comments on alcohol, and I'm yet to see, and I actually had an interaction with the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, a group there. I'd asked them to clarify something for me, and it was like we had this big spat. It was quite awful, and I thought, okay, I'm still going to say what I want to say, but there's a lot of breastfeeding freaked me out, because I wanted to say breastfeeding's great, and I couldn't say that. Like I ended up feeling like there was so much anger out there, particularly about advocacy with breastfeeding. And
just to clarify for those of you who hadn't read, and I should put my hand up and say I'm a failed breastfeeder, so everyone, it's all right, you can flog me in the town square after. But you did point out, I think, I found in a very refreshing way, the evidence around breastfeeding and bottle feeding, and some of it, while of course advocating for breastfeeding, also kind of trying to put a bit of to challenge what is sometimes the kind of hysterical advocacy, if you like.
Yeah, and it's a really tough one to untangle, because there's a good reason that there's advocacy there, and a lot of breastfeeding, advocates and lobbyists are doing a really good job, and they are working against a certain tide. But at the same time, women get told lies about what breastfeeding does. I mean, they get told ridiculous things about the value of breastfeeding, and some women are really tortured by the experience of breastfeeding when they shouldn't be breastfeeding. And, saying those kind of things. Yeah, and
and your baby will die if you don't. And
I wanted to write I thought I'd write a positive chapter, and I ended up with 2 chapters, one that kind of said breastfeeding's great, and one that said don't breastfeed, it's crock. And it was hard to and it was really coming from women, though, who had said to me, I've had these terrible experiences. Even women who had successfully breastfed for a long time still had stories. So, but there's a lot.
But again, isn't that? I mean, what you talked about before in terms of trusting women, in terms of health advocacy generally, there's a sense that you can't trust women to kind of say, you know what, to understand breastfeeding's fantastic, it's brilliant, it's great for the immune system, there's these benefits. At the same time, if you can't do it for these reasons, it's okay.
Yeah, not that your child will end up with kind of autism and asthma, and as they do, and wasn't it AIDS? It will give you AIDS.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. I don't know if any of you saw that. An ABA counsellor, unfortunately, told a group of people, and there was a journalist in the room, Paris, it was you, who'd recorded it. She'd said formula feeding was like giving a baby AIDS.
And it's funny, because breastfeeding in public, I think there's a lot of talk, and I talk about this in the book, that when you breastfeed in public, you do feel really embarrassed, and it can be a really hard thing to do, particularly for a first-time mother, and it's despicable the way that public breastfeeding is treated. But I also think women who bottle feed in public have a terrible time.
It's so specific, isn't it? Because I can tell you, as someone who had to pull out a bottle in North Fitzroy, I wasn't comfortable.
I've actually expressed this. It is like
I was smoking. No, I wasn't.
And you were drunk.
Yeah, that's right. Drunk as go. Any other questions for Monica? Yes, in the middle.
Hi, Monica. I haven't read the book, but as a woman in her 30s, you're sort of going through the whether or not to have kids debate. I kind of feel very much alone, and this is probably a different discussion, but when you go through thinking about the changes to your body and the changes to your life, and when you're not one of those people that sort of has that maternal kind of halo, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and sometimes I think women are not honest about whether or not motherhood is cracked up to be all that it is, and you struggle to read things or find information or even get women to admit that, they've had it and they're disappointed. And I was just wondering if in your research you encountered that.
That's a really interesting point, because I think that, and someone in the 70s wrote, some American woman had written this really great thing about how no one can come out as a mother and say they don't like it because they're saying something about their kids. And it is a bit like when you complain about the experience that, it's like you're complaining about your children who are human beings. And I think the discussion of,
or that you're mocking people who can't have children. That's the other one. I'm like, lucky you can have them. And
but I think if you have kids, it's extremely difficult to talk about the experience. I mean, my book does focus a lot on me, and I was very conscious of that, I suppose, because you don't want to kind of... But, I think there's this huge gap, and I think women find it very hard to talk about that. And I think there is this terrible sense today that having a child is this huge achievement and it's your destiny and that you're more of a woman once you have a kid, and it's not, there's good and there's bad. I kind of think it's...
Isn't it? I mean, it's also, I think, particularly in public discourse, it's not just that it's good and that it's fulfilling. It's the best thing you've ever done. Yeah. It's the biggest achievement you'll ever... Like, they obviously don't know any social workers or artists or doctors. It's the most important thing you'll ever do. Rather than going, it's a really important job, but it's not the most important job in the world. There's plenty of important jobs in the world, but there's no space for that in public discourse.
No, and I think it's really hard to... And even that idea of, why do you want kids? I mean, people have kids for lots of reasons. I actually wanted to write a chapter, which I didn't in the end, but like a funny chapter on why we have children. And it's funny, if I survey most of my friends, we don't have children because, I wanted to love. It's like there's lots of reasons that you end up finding yourself. I mean, I didn't mean to have kids. It just kind of happened. And it's fine. But yeah, I think there's no space to talk about not having kids, and when they do, it gets very defensive.
Don't you love that idea that, you know, if you're childless as well, your life must be boring? Like 99% of my friends are childless. They're travelling, they're going to shows, they're out of, I'm sitting there like watching the Wiggles going,
I mean, for me, having kids, I think I would be drunk a lot more.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
But yeah, I think that's very true, and I do think once women have the kids, they find it's a real struggle, and there's not much honesty about. You know, the times you hate your child and not, you know, your baby. Women often hate their newborns when they scream
and their
they haven't
partners.
slept. Yeah, and all those kind of resentments. It's really hard to articulate those because we don't want to say those things, and also today there's that fear that, well, if I say I wanted to throw my baby against the wall at 3 a.m. when it wouldn't stop crying.
Postnatal depression.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I wasn't depressed at all with my pregnancies, but I was really tired, particularly with my babies. And the first one in particular was such a physical shock. And I would have these feelings, and I remember thinking, this is normal. Like, I want to do this to anyone. Like, but yeah, you would. Like, if you've got someone just doing that, for like, you know. And
actually,
I think
there's a great comedian, Harley Breen, talks about being a new dad, and he says, you know, people say with the sleep deprivation, you'll get used to it. And he said, if I woke up every morning, someone punched me in the face, I'd fucking get used to that too. But it doesn't mean I would enjoy it, and I know exactly what he means.
Yeah, and women are really reluctant to write about those darker moments. And
I think I saw another hand up. If we can get to that questionnaire, was someone in the middle? Did anyone else have another question? Yeah. Right there.
I'm just really interested in when you were talking about the separation. If you're somebody who is quite cerebral and you spend a lot of time in your own head, and then the shock of being pregnant and suddenly having a body, and how sort of how strange that is. And I just would love you to talk a bit more about that and elaborate on how you navigated that, and what happens after you have the baby. Does it recede into the distance again? Or
you know, in some ways, I found postnatally it was quite exciting. I made the mistake of thinking that after I had my first, that I would, like, I actually went home and I put on a lot of weight in my pregnancies. Like, I was I was right off the scale in terms of how much weight I'd actually put on. But I went home naively after, you know, I had my first and I had to put my jeans back on, and I couldn't get them over my knee. It was like this, this was in the era before skinny jeans, so it wasn't like, these were actually flared. I've still got the jeans, and they were quite flared, and they just kind of
got the yoga pants. Anyone?
That was really. But I think for me, there were a lot of really good things that came from. I mean, and I keep talking about drinking, but you know, I used to drink a lot, and I think when I had that enforced abstinence of sorts, and then having the baby, I felt like I got healthier in some ways, and
it can pull you back into, like, if you are if you're overeducated or very cerebral, it can pull you back into your body. I wonder, you can try and theorise all that away. I mean, certainly my first pregnancy, I just read everything. That sense of control, the font on the birth plan, and this all happened, and this all, and then of course you realise none of that makes any difference at all. No. But that can be, it's a good reminder in a way.
Yeah, and you do, and even having, like, the fact that, you know, however the baby comes out, it's got to come out, is quite an amazing thing. I mean, all that kind of
surrender.
Yeah, that hoo-hoo kind of earth mother stuff, which I'm so not good at. But in some ways, I think there is this thing that overtakes you, and it is all encompassing, and afterwards you are changed, and you will always be changed. But it wasn't all bad, but I was fascinated by it, and I was frustrated that I couldn't talk about my experience without it being, you know, somehow taboo. Or even my vagina, it's like, if you do give birth vaginally, it's like a baby goes through your vagina, and it's like the genes, it's not going to be back where it was
it's not
the
like
next day.
It does.
No, and when I looked at myself, and I remember thinking, a baby passed through my vagina.
So Monica post-birth did something that I would not advise anybody else to do, and got a mirror. Just had a little bit of a look over the strong objection of her midwife a couple of days after giving birth. It had not even occurred to me to do that.
Oh, I don't know why. I was one of those post-baby hormones, because you get that rush after you birth. You go, I feel fantastic, and I've had a baby, it's so cool. And then I took a hand mirror and I looked, and I still, it's in my head. It's in my head what I saw, and I thought my intestines were falling out. I could see, and they looked like intestines. And and I couldn't tell my husband because I thought, what if I said to him, oh my God, and it's like this, and oh my God, it's going to be really, so I was quite discreet for a while about
Do you know,
that.
actually, my daughter said to me at the second birth, she said to me, do you have a baby in a hospital so someone else has to clean up the poo and blood?
Oh.
And I thought, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. You, of course, which I found quite fascinating too, given how much of a cerebral person you are, had a home birth second time. And there's a hilarious thing that I won't go into about disposing of the home birth water, which had not even occurred to me.
Yeah, we had a camber in our courtyard. So we didn't really practice like we should have, and you have to siphon out the birthing pool, which is just full of blood and shit, because I did shit the second time, and it wouldn't come. And my poor brother had been sucking on this hose, and I don't think he realised he was kind of basically swallowing birth chunks. I got him to eat my shit. That was the...
And if Monica's neighbours are here, it did end up just in the back lane. So I'm so sorry, but we're actually going to have to wrap up now. But ladies and gentlemen, can you please join me in thanking the fabulous Monica Dux?
And thank you, Nelly Thomas.
You're welcome. And for those of you who are interested, this book, of course, The Fabulous Things I Didn't Expect When I Was Expecting, is on sale, and Monica's happy to sign and talk to you about her vajayjay. The Great Feminist Denial is also on sale, and my book's on sale, but that's by the by. So thank you so much for coming, and hopefully we'll see you again at the Wheeler Centre. Thank you, Monica.
Thanks, Nelly.